Now more than ever week, and of course our speaker will get more into it, but now more than ever week was created right after the village, and it's something, a chant that, for all of you who are familiar with Black Caucus and our events, and we do Now More Than Ever chant, that was by Gil Scott Heron, and we utilize this week to celebrate our alumni, our legacy, and the things that they've done, even people before the village, back into 88, back into 68 even beyond 68, even before there was a Frederick Douglass Association back in the 40s when NAACP was started here at Penn State. So we just try to do this to just have a constant reminder, especially in climates like these, just to remind you all, to keep you all encouraged about the work that was done before us, but that to encourage you all that we can all do that same work if we're just reaching out and sharing information. And without further ado, Ms. LaKeisha Wolf.
My apologies for being a few minutes late.
It's okay.
It's all right. You're right on time.
We walked around a little bit when I got there earlier, and I walked into the section of the hub that's like brand new, and I was like, I mean, it was like a virtual reality experience.
Right.
So it's totally different. I mean, but then the other side of the hub is the same. And it was nice to just walk through what we call the road, the Caucus and Cultural Center. I guess you guys use the acronym now. But I was telling Ashley we was replaying some of the things from the past, right, which is what Sankofa is about. So before I really get into talking,
More to the mic.
yeah, is that better?
Is that better?
Can you hear me?
That's what I say. I can hear it.
Is there like a volume that's on here? Does that work? Is that better? Okay. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me in the back? Okay. But what I want to do, actually, before we really start talking, is I would like to lead us in a libation, if that's all right. Libation is something that I learned from an elder and mentor back in Pittsburgh, where I'm from, and actually brought this practice to Penn State. So every time that we would have Sankofa, we opened Sankofa with libation. And libation is an old, ancient practice that, you know, African people of color in different cultures do in different ways, but it's basically a way to honor the circle of life, right? And to really pay homage to the fact that you didn't get here by yourself, that we're standing on the shoulders of a lot of people, right? And that the work that we do today is for our children of tomorrow. So I would like to do that. And when we do libation, because it's about life, we use a plant, or if you're outside, but sometimes when you're in spaces and you don't have a plant, you can just sprinkle the water on the ground, because like water, we always rise, right? So I'm gonna ask you all to stand up. And generally, when we do Sankofa, and when we do libation, we do it in a circle, right? So this room doesn't allow us to have a full circle, right? Because a circle for us and for African people, right? And for a lot of like indigenous people around the world, we know what the circle represents, right? Anybody have any idea of why we would do something in a circle? I'm gonna be a t-shirt. Circle of life, right? Because in a circle, there is no beginning and there is no end, like life, right? So we recognize in the circle of life, those who are here now, but then we also recognize our ancestors, right? And we keep them with us, and we keep that work with us by calling their names and remembering them, right? So I know that in Pittsburgh, and I'm sure it's like a national thing, right? Some of the issues around Black women dying, right? And so there's a whole say her name, right? And so it's really that. It's about saying the names of your family members who have passed, but then also the ancestors that we all share, right? Like Malcolm X or like Winnie Mandela. So we use water because water represents life, right? Everything that is alive in some fashion or form requires this substance. And so libation is non-religious, non-denominational, and it's really about recognizing the fact that there is something bigger than, greater than ourselves, but also that we're connected and we're a part of that circle. So we raise up this water and we honor God, Allah, Jesus, Buddha, whatever name that you use to call the Most High, that force, that energy that opens your eyes in the morning, that somehow lulls you to sleep, right? That makes the grass turn green, makes the leaves fall, that force that pulses through all of us and connects us all. We acknowledge that life and we say Ashe. Ashe. So I'm going to ask you to say Ashe. So if you agree with me, I say Ashe and you say Ashe, right? And Ashe is a Yoruba word, which means in agreement with, or let it be so, let it be done, okay? So I'm going to pour water into our plant, to the right and to the left, to acknowledge the balance of the male and female principle. It's the principle that exists within all of our bodies, the principle that exists in our families, in our communities, and we call on that balance and we say Ashe. Ashe. We're going to pour water in the 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, to acknowledge all of the places on this planet that our ancestors, where they've been born, where they've struggled, where they've given, where they've died, where they have contributed great things, right? And we also pour water in those 4 directions to acknowledge the 4 seasons of change and recognizing what season you may be in, right? There's things that come in certain seasons and there's things that go, right? And so we recognize that and we say Ashe. Ashe. We're going to pour water for all of our ancestors, the names we know and the names we do not know, and their uncomfortable spirits. Ashe. Ashe. We're going to pour water for our elders and our teachers who are here right now and who give us so much of their wisdom, who show us what to do, who show us through good examples and also through bad examples what's right and what's wrong. And for their leadership, for them we say Ashe. Ashe. We pour water for the principle of umoja, unity. That's the principle that should guide us in everything that we do. And for that we say Ashe. Ashe. We're going to pour water for all of our children, the babies who are here now and the babies who are yet to be born, that we are working and we are struggling for them, right? And I think about my children all the time, and I teach my daughter how to do libation because I want her to know when I'm gone, to remember me as her mother, as her first teacher, right? And all that I've given her. And so for those children, we say Ashe. Ashe. And so right now, I'm going to ask that you all, out loud, using your voice, the power of your voices, to call out an ancestor, at least one or more, that somebody in your family that has passed away, somebody that you know, right, nationally, internationally, who you feel like has contributed something to your life, who has provided a wonderful example, right, and call out their names. And we're going to ask that their spirit and their memory and the work that they've done, right, all that they've given, that be with us this evening as we have this conversation. I'm going to call out my great-grandmother, Henrietta Smith. Ashe. Ashe. So y'all just call them out. Just say it. Fannie Lou Hamer. Aisha Bass, Queen Annie, all right, family. For all those names, we called all of those names. We did not call the ones we know, the ones we don't know. We thank them and we honor them for all that they've given us, right? And for all that we'll learn now and into the future. And for all of them, we say Ashe. And together, let this almost circle be unbroken. And let's say Ashe 3 times to end the libation. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Wonderful. So you can have a seat. So I was telling some of the Black Caucus members that I'd like to think that I'm like super organized and really good at planning, but I do a lot and I wear a lot of hats. And so as much as I wanted to like have some real strong bullet points and an outline for this conversation, I didn't prepare that and I just didn't have time. But what hit me last night were kind of like 3 main things that I feel like really resonate with me and what my life and my work is about. And those 3 main themes that I would like to just impart in whatever comes out of my mouth tonight. I'm praying that the Spirit will just guide me to give you what you need and what you want. And I know that there's a question and answer, we can talk about whatever. But those 3 things, I'm calling them the 3 Ps. And those 3 Ps are privilege, power, and purpose, right? Purpose, to me, is everything. It's everything. It is unchanging, right? In that we are given and gifted with all of these different tools and skills and knowledge in order to live out our purpose, right? And for me, my understanding is that purpose never changes, right? And the overarching theme of purpose, right, is that we're all here to help somebody. So anytime that I ask somebody, what is your purpose? And someone's like, well, I never really thought about it. I feel like, I just want to help people, right? And I mean, and that is humanity, right? So like that is step number 1. But your goal is to dig a little bit deeper. And one of the things that was clear to us, right? So Sankofa, we were just talking in the car about the fact that Sankofa next year will be 20 years old. And so Sankofa still exists outside of Penn State. Sankofa began when I was a student here in 1999, and it traveled. So and it actually became like a nonprofit. So the work of Sankofa grew and became this nonprofit called Sankofa Community Empowerment Incorporated that some of my friends still run today. They live in Brooklyn, New York. And so, but Sankofa, when we left Penn State, so I'm from Pittsburgh, I'm first generation Pittsburgh. My family is from Philadelphia, both of my parents. And so growing up in Pittsburgh, I never felt very connected because I didn't have the extended family. Like we were the only Black family in a white Jewish neighborhood. And so there's certain things that I just did not experience in ways in which my parents did not prepare me for the world. I think that my parents really only focused on like get good grades, right? And then those good grades will get you a good job and then you'll have a good life, right? That was just the basics. And I think that, that's like my parents' generation. I think that is, and I'm not sure if that's what parents still tell you today. You could tell me what your experience is. But my parents, their generation, right, and they are in their mid-60s, that was the push, like just get good grades. And so that's just what I did, right? But I have a very explicit memory in elementary school on the school bus. And the windows were down, and I'm on the school bus, and for lack of, I don't know what the girl's name was, but for a lack of better name, we'll just call her Sally or Becky or whatever her name was, right? So it was a girl who has blonde hair. and the window's down, and the wind is blowing, and the wind is blowing her hair, right? And I remember sitting there behind Becky in the seat and feeling so inferior. Feeling inferior, right? And I was probably like 7, right? Like my daughter is about to turn 7. Like nobody had ever, my parents and nobody else around me had ever said anything to me about race, anything to me specifically, you know, like your hair is beautiful, right? I don't remember those things. It was just taken for granted that I'm just gonna be okay, and as long as I did what was expected in the world, right? That I follow these steps, I'm just gonna turn out okay. But I remember that moment, and it stuck with me my entire life, because I remember thinking, I wish that my hair blew like that, right? And it's funny because, of course, now I know, right, that even though nobody explicitly said to me, like, you're ugly, or, you know, or your skin color is a problem, right, that somehow these are things that, right, whether somebody calls you a nigger as a child or not, somehow in our experience being Black in America, there are things that we pick up, right? And so back in Pittsburgh, I'm an artist and I'm an arts administrator. And I'm working on, last year I worked on a project called the Pride Project. And Pride stands for Positive Racial Identity Development in Early Education. And it's out of Pitt. And so what they did is Pitt's Office of Child Development. And they did this study that was very thorough. And they said children as young as 2 or 3, right, clearly have an understanding of some sort about race, right? So you all have seen, most of you I'm sure have seen the doll study. There was one that happened in the 60s, and then there was one that happened, I think, in the early 2000s. They did it again to see if the results would still be the same, right? And the results are still the same, right? Because white supremacy still exists. And the reality is that children, right, as young as 2 or 3, right, when they're talking and interacting in the world, right, whether you give them explicit messages or not, they are picking up on racial cues, right? They're watching TV. All of the ways in which information comes into the psychological system, they already have an understanding about what is considered beautiful, who is considered smart, right? All of those things happen very, very, very early. And so what this project does is use like Africana art to just positively reinforce good things for Black kids, right? And so I have the privilege of working in and on that project, right? And we did these pop-up festivals where, and we did them in 3 predominantly Black communities in Pittsburgh, where children and their parents could come and participate with all of these different tents and like stations with hands-on art, right? That just reinforce their beauty, their intelligence, right? And all of these different things, all of these different ways, but really upheld our culture, right? And so I'm sharing that because, you know, and I'm going to use the word again, privilege, that I have the privilege to have, from my experience here at Penn State and Sankofa, to have taken that with me. And the reality is that when I went back to Pittsburgh from here, right, like I actually didn't want to, so that wasn't the plan. It wasn't the plan. I was going to be, well, kind of was the plan, but I was going to do broadcast journalism. That's what my Penn State degree is, in broadcast journalism. I wanted to be an anchor woman. And there's a Black woman who, growing up, was the anchor woman in Pittsburgh on Channel 11, Derek Chisholm. And she was just so great. And she was one of the only Black women that I saw on TV, and I wanted to be like her. And I wrote my senior essay about how I wanted to change the way Black people were viewed on the nightly news. Because I knew a little bit, even though I didn't have an extensive like understanding about race and white supremacy. I knew that what I was seeing, by the time I got to high school, I knew that what I was seeing and experiencing as a teenager wasn't fair, right? And so I was like, you know, I want to do something about that. And so I actually started out at Penn State Altoona and chose to go there. I actually had a scholarship to Penn State, another privilege, right? And this, which I found out later on, was a scholarship that was set up, it's the Button Waller, right? I had those double L's. And so, you know, and just, of course, didn't necessarily know who Button Waller was, right? Like who are those people? I didn't know until later on, right? Like that this scholarship was named after these black students. But I had the privilege because the reality is like school debt is real and it's bringing people all the way down. And that's just a whole other conversation. But I have the privilege to not have that on my back. And so that's that piece. So, but I've had the privilege to create something in Pittsburgh where I don't have to a certain extent, deal with, because I don't, in my environment, I don't, like we center Black people in my environment, right? And it's intentional and it's on purpose and it's all of that. And so when people enter into Ujima Collective in Pittsburgh, they know that they're entering a space that centers like Africana people. And that's our job and that's our role, and we don't make any apologies or changes with that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but when I came back from Penn State, and when I left here escorted by the new Black Panther Party, because shit was real. I'm just gonna be totally honest with you. Like, it was very, very real up in this piece. Like, and my whole life was changed, and I recognized that I couldn't pursue being an anchor woman in the way that I thought that I could, because I felt like I would, if I took that traditional route, I'd continue to be the same thing that I wanted to change. Like I would be, especially at the beginning, right? You'd be this talking head and you're just reading these 30 seconds, like Black man was, you know, caught, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And I was just like, I don't want to do that because even if he was arrested, like we don't know the backstory. Like we don't know. And I'm not going to continue to do a disservice to my community by not telling full context and full truth, right? Like there's certain things that I cannot do and I cannot participate in. And I've made that decision for my own life, right? And in your lives, you're gonna have to make a decision now and later about what you choose to do and what you don't do based on privilege, power, and purpose. But when I went back to Pittsburgh, when I was, actually after my freshman year, I went home to get my first summer job. And my dad's friend was like, oh, there's this youth program hiring in South Oakland, which is a neighborhood of Pittsburgh. And so I went like, okay, I'm gonna work with some kids in the summer program. And went, and the interview was with like 3 people, which was really overwhelming to be 18 years old. And what I actually found out was that the program was, it was in like a traditional community center, and it was like mixed race, Black and white people were there, but it was a pilot that this guy named Fred Brown was doing. And he was a master's in social work student, and it was a pilot using like African-centered principles, like infusing them into a youth program. And so at the time, Fred he also was a bodybuilder, and he was just huge. And he was big and intimidating, like physically, but he was like super smart and super conscious and super knowledgeable. But I remember he said, I'm gonna take a chance on you. You're close to the same age as the students that you're working with these teenagers, but I like you, I think you showed promise. And him hiring me changed my whole life. And as I was teaching these children, right, I was learning because I had never, up to that moment in my life, right, I was African American, but I never considered the African part. Like I never really thought about that deeply because nobody in my life, in my family, had ever talked about what does that mean to be African American, right? Like there was no symbolism, there was no values, there were no like things linked to what that word meant. So that word didn't really mean anything to me. And so through this program, teaching these young people, Fred Brown put a stack of books in front of me and said, in order to do this program and work with these kids, I need you to read all of these books, right? And it totally just opened me up because I had to read these books, but then take this information and make these really creative, like interactive activities for these kids. And the program was based off of the principles of Ma'at, right? And so Ma'at is an Egyptian or Kemetic, like deity. And so the story is, and this is like, this is predating Christianity, right? So the story is that when you die, your heart is weighed by the scales of Ma'at. And your heart is weighed against a feather. And Ma'at has 42 what are called admonitions, right, or confessions. But what's interesting about it is when I saw this, I was like, oh, this is the 10 Commandments. Like, this is where the 10 Commandments came from, right? And my dad is a pastor, and I grew up in the church. But it was just so interesting to me because everything that I knew, right, you think that you know a lot until you learn some more and you realize how much you don't know, right? And so I was like, oh, like this isn't the end all, and I'm not here to offend anybody who's Christian or anything else, but I recognize that wasn't for me, it wasn't the end all be all, right? It didn't contain all of it didn't contain all of the answers to the questions that I had, right, like about life. And so when I started to learn this information, it put context around so much. And so, but with these young people, we focused on 7 principles of Ma'at. And essentially that program changed my life. And so I would, every break from Penn State, every summertime, spring break, all of that, I went home to work in this program. Because what I didn't have prior to this, as a first generation Pittsburgher, was I didn't have community because I didn't have extended family. So it was just my parents, my siblings, and me, right? So I didn't have all of that. So I felt very isolated growing up. I never felt like I was from Pittsburgh. I didn't feel rooted. And what I was experiencing, what I could put words to now, was Fred Brown and these other teachers and mentors that he introduced me to helped to root me. Right, and that was my first experience of community. And I think that's why I just kept going back. So it wasn't necessarily about whatever little paycheck that they were paying me to work with these kids. It was that I had built these relationships with these children. I had built relationships with these teachers and mentors, right? And there's actually a Penn State professor. He's at the Greater Allegheny campus in LaKeisha, which is Pittsburgh. Named Dr. Tony Mitchell, and he's the one who taught me libation. And he taught me about honoring our ancestors and the power in that. And what was so interesting for me was that what this experience was giving me was the language and the words to describe things that I never had the language to describe. So for me as a child, I felt like there was always something talking to me as a child. Like there was always some other voice in my head that was telling me to not be the statistic that some of my childhood trauma was preparing me to be, right? So, as a child, which most girls and boys are prone to, is molestation, right? Sexual abuse. And I had that experience, and I didn't voice it for my entire life until I was 19 at Penn State here on this campus. But it was something that was literally like killing me inside. But what was interesting about it is that I always had something in the back of my head that would always tell me, don't do that. Or, just had me almost like hyper aware. So there were things that I still did that I attribute to my trauma. But there's things that I know that kept me and that held me and that protected me from going too far to the right or too far to the left. And so to this day, I would say that it was my ancestors who walked with me and who stopped me from doing the extra, kept me in places and in spaces within myself to not lose myself. Because when I did finally voice the fact that I had this experience, right, when I was here, it set me into a depression. And what saved me in those moments was writing. And I would write poetry. And like when I go back now and read those poems, I'm like, oh my God, like, you know what I mean? Like I was really in that space. And it's hard to read it because it was sad and it was very depressing. And it was clear that I had low self-esteem. I didn't feel good about who I was. But it was that pen and that pad that saved my mind, my spirit, right? Because what ended up happening is I started to share the things that I was writing. I was encouraged to start to share those things. And so using my voice and my experience in that testimony, like sharing that testimony of what I had experienced saved me. And I hope that, it impacted and saved some of my sisters or brothers. But I wanted to, talk a little bit, because I'm sure that you all want to maybe hear a little bit about what happened when I was here. And I think that there's things that you know, and I know that there's a lot of things that you don't know. So when I came to Penn State main campus in 99. I transferred from Altoona, and I was going about my life like I lived on campus and going to classes, and one day we found out that Amadou Diallo was shot in New York. I don't know if you guys know that story, right? It was a police brutality situation, right? He was an African immigrant, and he was shot like 19 times, right? They thought he had a gun. He was standing at his doorstep, holding his wallet, like trying to get out his ID or whatever he was doing, right? And they shot him in the back 19 times, and murdered this man, right? And here on campus, like a lot of black students were outraged, like black people across the country, right, when this happened. And there was a brother named Joseph Dawkins, who was the president of Black Caucus in 99. And I was telling some of the students earlier that, when he came to Penn State, he actually was a football player on a scholarship. And he gave it up.
Wow.
And he gave it up because he felt oppressed as a black football player at Penn State. Like he compared running on the field to feeling like he was on a plantation, right? And he was like a top athlete. Like he came out of high school with like all these accolades and all of this stuff, right? Like he was like a track, football, like just a star at all of these things. But he gave all that shit up because of a purpose, right? And because of the issue of power. Right, and so, and of course, as you all probably know, like some of the football players have a lot of privilege. But he gave it up. And so I had met him actually, we were in Sam Richards' sociology class together. That's how I met, that's how I met Joe. And I really just admired him. And to be honest, I was like, oh, he's really cute. And I was attracted to him, just to be transparent. But I was like, but I did really admire his leadership. And so he actually had planned this like impromptu sort of rally after we heard about what had happened in New York. And so it was like all of these black students, I guess probably gathered in the hub, but we left the hub and we walked up one of these streets. And I remember it was really cold and it was windy. I do remember that. And we got up there, and Joe's like this really passionate person, and so Joe was like, I don't know, like he's yelling, and it's just this whole thing. But all of these students and folks were like standing around, and we were together, but we were trying to figure out like how do we express our outrage, right? Because we know that this has happened before. There's countless stories, right? This is our history in this country, and we know that this isn't going to be the last time, and we know that these officers are not going to go to jail. Like we know all of this is just what it is, right? But that is, but I remember in that moment, I felt like Spirit took a hold of me in that moment. And that was actually the first time that I did libation at Penn State, like in this community. And I just felt like Spirit just told me, this is what you need to do in this moment. Like this is what you need to do to bring everybody together, right? With all of the emotions and all of the feelings. And this is just what it is. And so, that's what I did. And so after that, it just brought everybody into like a real focused sort of a space. And we began to, talk about different things. But there were certain issues that occurred that year with white student groups, and then there was, in '99, there was a slew of racist emails, right, that were directed to a lot of black students on campus, right? They hit them in their inbox, and in these letters, it was probably like 2 or 3 iterations of these emails, and the letters were signed "The Patriot." And what's so interesting about it is, of course, Penn State was like, oh no, this has nothing to do with us, right? And so they said that they investigated and they linked it back to some computer lab at Temple, right? But they said that they didn't know who the Patriot was, what that was. But what was interesting to us is that, we got on the internet, right? We clearly weren't professional online investigators, but we got on the internet and found a whole website that's called The Patriot. That's a white supremacist group, right? And it was just like, well, how do you say that you're doing an investigation and you got all the resources and all the knowledge of investigating, but we can't ever get any results, right? We can't ever get anywhere, yet somehow the regular average Joe can figure it out, right? And so that was one of the first examples of Penn State, why, what, how, you know what I mean? And so some of what I saw happen that year is actually what prompted me to get more involved in the Black Caucus. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna get involved. I'll just run for the president. I'll just do that. And so I did that. And what was interesting is the summer before my senior year, as we were kind of prepping for what we were gonna do, all of the exec board members, the 4 of us, were all women, and I guess it was all women this year. No.
We got one guy. We got Chris. Chris.
Go, Chris.
Oh,
yeah, so it was all women, right? And we had said to ourselves, you know what? Because we were just, we had to hype ourselves up because a lot of people had doubts. And we were like, just like Queen Latifah, we gonna set it up. And so that's what we were doing. And I actually was so intrigued when Ashley told me that the like student budget or the budget for student groups can be like $20,000, which did not exist at all. Like, we had to do a fundraiser, probably raise like $500, and we're happy we had some money in the bank. You know what I mean? And that's like all we had. But we were determined to do some programming that year. And so what I decided to do was I definitely wanted to do what we called our Saturday school. And it was based off of the program that I had worked at in Pittsburgh. And so we worked with, you know, of course, a lot of faculty and staff here, right? They're like Black people in this Black community, and they had children. And we said, we're gonna do a program and serve the children of color in this community. And so we did Saturday school for months. We did a lot of good work throughout the year, but what we recognized actually coming into the year, which had been an ongoing issue, is the fact that the AAAS department, right, the African American Studies department, was being minimized. And so some of the faculty were telling us that they were having a hard time getting tenure, right? That they would go to the dean, to Susan Welch, over and over and over again and get shot down, right? And their research and their work was not being respected, right? And in many ways was being undermined. And so we began to really look into that, right? So that was one of the issues that we started to sort of investigate on our own and try to, you know, we tried to raise like awareness around that specific issue because we recognize that this is the only department specifically designed to deal with us, right? Like this is the only place that we know for certain we're going to talk about Black people, our experiences, and our condition, right? And that if this is being downsized, it sends the message that what we do, who we are, what we experience, our quality of life is not important. And so we're not going to deal with that, right? And so we were like, no, we need to address that. So the start of my senior year, there was an event that a lot of the Black student groups held. It was kind of like a freshman, like so freshmen could come and see all of the different groups that they could join. So like Black Caucus was there, the African Student Association, Caribbean, all of the Black Greeks, right? So we're all in this room. We held this event together, and you know, and it was a very professional event. So like the Black Greeks had on their letters, right? So they were representing themselves, right? But the rest of us had on suits, ties, dresses, right? Everybody looked very nice, right? Because we wanted to impress upon these incoming students, right? Like here are ways to get involved, right? And that it's not just having fun all the time, like fun is involved, but we're gonna do some work and we're gonna make an impact, right? And this is about your development and your advancement to get you where you want to be in life, right? And so the Daily Collegian decided that they were going to cover the story of this event. And the next day or whatever, when I looked at the newspaper, now mind you, I'm a journalism student, right? So I've been studying this going on 4 years, right? And when the paper came out, and I'm going to see if I actually have it in my binder of artifacts. When the article came out, or when the paper came out, there actually was no article for the event. What it was there was a picture of, I think it was the Omega Sci-Fi. I don't know if they're still on campus, but so it was the Q's, right? And they had on their Greek letter shirts. And here it is. Here it is. We have the privilege of documenting a lot of things. And so when it came out, and I wish that I could use this projector.
Oh, there's two projectors.
Hmm?
There's one